Thank you very much for coming to get journalists to cover your game. Today we're going to talk about exactly that, by lessons learned from online dating, praying in No Man's Sky. Before we start off with that, 3 other things. Firstly, please turn off your phones if you sit here around. Secondly, please evaluate this session after it's over. And thirdly, thank you so much for coming. I know there's a cellar talk going on in the other room, so I really appreciate everybody that's here. In preparation of the talk, I did something that I think most people do when they do a presentation or public speaking. Maybe you've done it as well. You maybe Google what makes a good talk. And what you always find is a good intro. And what people say, what makes a good intro is either you have something that's really emotionally touching. Maybe it's scary or really funny. Or the other thing is you have interesting stats. And I thought, why not do both? Why not start with some super scary stats? And that is a super scary stat. That is the main problem why it's really hard to get journalists to cover your game. That is the number of sheer games that's coming out at the moment. You can see it goes from 2006, where it's quite low, and until it goes to 2014, 15, 16, where it just skyrocketed. So last year we had over 4,000 games. That's 11 games per day. That's really crazy. We don't even know where that's going. Maybe Steam changes a bit, but maybe it keeps the trend up, and next year could look a bit like that. Or it could go even worse, maybe it goes like that, who knows? Anyway, there's loads of games coming out, and that's only Steam. You also have consoles, you have mobile games, and so on. So you see, that is a big problem, just the sheer volume of games coming out. But there's also another very big problem, the second problem, not letting you off the hook yet. There's even more super scary stats. And that's related to that. That is the landing page of Eurogamer on the day when No Man's Sky launched. So Eurogamer, one of the most biggest influential gaming websites in the world, on the day when No Man's Sky came out. And what we see in red here is all the articles that were about No Man's Sky on that day. Which means if you're not No Man's Sky, you can fight about those 2 little spots on the landing page with a few other 100 games. And of course, that doesn't mean Eurogamer is evil. They're not getting paid loads of money by Sony to do that. They simply write articles that their readers want to read, and on that day there was No Man's Sky. On a bigger scale, and that is the scary stat, we looked at the media coverage at ICO. We developed different tools, and one of the tools basically measures the gaming media landscape. So it tracks articles from 10,000s of websites across the US and Europe. And that's the articles output of all of them per month. And you can see there's some spikes, like June when E3 happens, or when it goes to the Christmas period. And what we highlight here in purple now is the coverage that the top 20 game get. So that's your Overwatches, that's your Division, and so on. So those games get a good chunk of the total coverage of all gaming websites. And the other a few hundred games that are released constantly have to fight over that yellow bar. So it's very hard for them to get traction. Again, because press wants to write things that the readers want to see, and that is often top 20 games. So far for the problems, we have why it's hard to get good media coverage, but we also want to talk about how we can get good media coverage. Before we do that, a few words about me. My name is Thomas Reisenegger. I work for ICO Partners, a PR and consultancy agency in Brighton, UK. And I worked with a lot of different games, from very big games like League of Legends of Smite and Endless Space 2, to more indie projects like doing the PR for Indicate Europe, working on Omello in Europe, or A Normal Lost Phone. And I also worked as a video game freelance journalist for 7 years, so I also know the other side of the game, what you're looking for as a journalist if you want to cover games. But of course, the real star of this talk is not the PR side, it is the influencer and the press side. So in preparation for the talk, I talked to a lot of people, journalists from very high-profile websites, interviewed them, sent them questions, were on panels with them, watched talks from other conferences they gave, talked to a lot of peers, to a lot of other PR people, what are their experiences. So that's kind of the source for this talk, where the information comes from. So a few famous websites that we talked for this talk that had strong influences, for example, Waypoint, Kotaku, The Guardian, Killscreen, Rock Paper Shotgun, and big European websites. So what we're going to talk about today is 3 chapters. First of all, we're going to talk, is PR even the right thing for you? It's not always the case. PR is a great tool, but not for every game. We're going to talk about 5 facts from the media landscape, 5 key insights, and then we talk. In the end, we're going to have it's almost like a step-by-step guide how you can get good media coverage. So, first chapter: is PR even the right thing for you? Maybe. I think there are, in general, 3 communication ways how you can reach your players and important people you want to sell your game to. And I would roughly categorize them into marketing, which is everything that's paid for. That's Facebook ads, that's paid YouTubers, and so on. Everything you spend directly money on. You have your community, where you talk directly to your players and foster a community to sell your games. And you have PR. That is influencers, that is press, that cover your game, but you don't pay them to do so. You can more or less convince them or work with them so they produce coverage for you. And all those things are important, and all those things can work great for different games. I think there's not one that's better than the other. So that's a disclaimer as PR person. I think PR is good, but it's not always the solution for your game. And I think especially with that crowded media landscape that we have today, it's really about finding the right mix for you. Do you do all of those things? Do you do maybe two of one? Maybe you're just really good at one, might as well work. But I think it's really important to experiment and also figure out how those things work together. For example, marketing tends to work very well for AAA games, for casual games, copycat games, not meaning in a bad way, but if you make a match-free puzzle game, that can work well if it's well made, but it's not going to win an innovation prize at an indie game conference. Mobile games, for example. Community tends to work well with long-running games, with niche games, and with early access games, where you build up your community. And PR classically tends to work well with classic premium games, with hardcore free-to-play games, with critics games, and for B2B topics. And today we're going to focus on the third pillar. We're going to focus on PR and influencers, how we get coverage from them without paying them. To do that best, I think it's good to understand the media landscape, how that works in general. And for that, we have some interesting stats that we got together from our tools. And the first question is, how much media coverage is good coverage? It's often really hard to measure if you're doing a good job in PR, or if is it enough? Do you do good PR or bad PR? So we looked at the launch coverage of games. What we did, we looked at the launch day and measured that, and then 3 days before, when there's a bit of hype, and the 3 days after. So in general, a AAA game tends to get around 1,500 articles. So that's your Horizon Zero Dawns, that's your Divisions, that's the really, really big games. A AAA game, a premium indie game, tends to get around 231 articles. Those are the really high-profile indie games. So that would be a Spelunky or an Old Boy, Undertale. So the really, really big names. And what is really important there, always keep your peers in mind. A lot of people talk to me about, oh, they want to have really good PR like other indie games like No Man's Sky. But No Man's Sky was, in terms of PR, absolutely not an indie game. Maybe in terms of development, but not in PR. So we compared the coverage for launch from No Man's Sky, we can see in the right, very high, to 2 actual indie games, Inside and Collateral Cowboy, and you can see it absolutely shrinks them. So always pick your peers wisely when you measure if your PR is going well or not. Secondly, we looked at who talks about which platforms, especially interesting if you're working on a console title. We looked at the coverage over the last years from PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And you can see the PlayStation 4 in blue in general gets more coverage than the Xbox. In fact, on general, media tends to talk 35% more about PlayStation games. How that can help you in PR is, of course, that if you work on both platforms, it may be wise to always push your PlayStation version first, mention it first, and see that you got more traction, because more media just has an easier time talking about PlayStation because there are more PlayStation players, so they will get more clicks from PlayStation readers. We also made the same stat on a country breakdown. If you look at other European media markets, for example, France tends to cover PlayStation on an average level, where they talk less about Xbox and less about Steam and more about Nintendo than other markets. Of course, that doesn't mean that they talk about Xbox at all, but just in general, less than other markets. I think one of the most important graphs from today is looking at media in terms of what is mobile games media and what is PC and console media. So the big games versus the small games. And we looked at the launch coverage, again, from a very famous mobile game, from Clash Royale. And you can see when it launches, it gets a nice spike in news coverage. But then we compare it to an indie game. We compare it to Goat Simulator when it goes to the Games for Gold program on Xbox. And that's not even a strong news feed for them. Game has been out for a while. But you can already see it completely shrinks Clash Royale. It makes it very small. But then we compare that to the launch of an actual AAA game of Deus Ex. And suddenly you see Goat Simulator looks kind of small, Clash Royale is hardly visible on the graph. And that is not because Clash Royale did bad PR job and they got bad coverage. That is simply because of the fact that there are way less mobile websites than there are console and PC websites. So that's always important to keep in mind when you promote your game. We also looked at what are the most talked about VR headsets. And you can see in blue, the PlayStation VR gets some really good spikes, especially when it launches. And what you can also see in general, the Oculus in red gets more media coverage than the HTC Vive in green. So again, similar to the consoles, I would recommend to put the Oculus first if you pitch games to press. And then we looked at the key fact number 5. A really interesting phenomenon is sometimes you just see that news just starts spreading out of nowhere, and they get on all websites, even in countries that you maybe not serve from a PR point of view, but those news just go big. And what we see often how that happens is that certain websites cover it. Your IGN, PC Gamer, GameSpot, Rock Paper Shotgun, Polygon. Really high profile websites that have one thing in common: they are English speaking websites. And if 2 or 3 of those English websites, I can promise you, talk about your news, it's going to spread on loads of other English websites, but it's also going to spread in loads of other countries that you not necessarily contact directly. They definitely act as an opinion leader that other countries look at. That doesn't mean that there's no value in also doing PR in the other countries. You will get better coverage if you have German translating material and you talk to German press directly. But if you only have money to focus on one country or one market, it may be advisable to go to the English media, because if you win then over, you're going to see spread to other countries. And the third chapter, I think the chunkiest bit of the talk, is more or less a step-by-step guide on how you get press coverage in 5 golden rules. So the first step is make your game Tinder-ready. I think that's really important. I think we can learn loads of Tinder, because if you're a journalist, you get hundreds and hundreds of emails of days, and you only have a few seconds to check them. And that is very similar on Tinder. And often, you just have that. You have one screenshot, maybe the title of the game, and then you read one sentence. So for example, that's the game Galactic Chunk League, has a screenshot here, and the text is build whatever ship you want and battle with your friends. Okay. But it could also look like that. There's a GIF, you see, oh, that's weird, there's a teddy bear, there's a hot dog, there's some shipbuilding going on. That looks kind of cool. All right, there's also fighting, okay. And then you see the title screen. And suddenly you know a lot about the game. And then you could describe it as galactic babies and battle-ready space toilet. Build and battle your ships in any shape. And you can see we pitched a completely same game, just with a more creative wording and with a little GIF that shows us a lot of the games. And suddenly we understand a lot more. We understand there's humor. We understand you can build a lot of different ships with the ship creator, because you can already see it. And you can also see there's battle going on. So as you can see, if you manage to convey your message, I think that's the important one, how to get the game Tinder ready. Within 10 seconds, you can have a really big advantage about a lot of other pitches. When we talked about media, one of the main complaints they get from developers is they get really long emails that are hard to read. It's not that they do not want to read them, but if you get 300 emails a day, you can only read so much before you just bleed out of your eyes. So really make your game Tinder ready. That's the new elevator pitch. Convey your message within 10 seconds, really break it down to the most interested element, to the most interesting story. And a good thing, said it before, that helps is that are GIFs. Big fan of GIFs. They can convey a lot of messages. That's just some examples of games we've worked on. And they can be great to show some quotes from press if the game is maybe visual and not as exciting. They can be great to show some cutscenes and gameplay. In the right corner down, just show a gameplay element. Or in the left upper corner, that is a narrative game, a normal lost phone. And it doesn't look as visually exciting if it's just seen on a screenshot. However, in a little GIF, you can always make like a film trailer that conveys the concept and the theme of the game. So the journalist is already intrigued and prepared. And then when they look at the screenshots and see it's a text adventure, they're okay with it because they already know what the game is about. If you don't know how to make GIFs, no worries. We did put a guide together. You can find it at icopartners.com/GIF guide, where we just describe how we make GIFs, how we make them from trailers, which tools we use to record them, what are the upload sizes, what are good ways to use them. And we really like to use them as well on social media as in emails. It's a really good tool if it's not too big to just put it directly into an email. And the second thing we can learn from Tinder is it is way better also in terms of PR to be amazing for a few people than okay for many. It's one of the most common mistakes, I think. I saw a statistic on that, on online dating, that people, if they start online dating, they put their profile online and they say, I like good films, I like my friends, and I like music. But who doesn't? That's not the point. You want to be exciting for a small group that actually wants to talk to you instead of being okay for a lot of people that maybe like your game on Facebook, but they're not actually going to buy it in the end. So if you go back to the Tinder analogy, it is probably way more successful that if you're, for example, if you're a cosplayer, your Tinder profile first thing shows a full-on cosplay outfit. 90% of people will not like that. They will be maybe confused, they don't like cosplaying or whatever. But the 10% that are actually going to like it, they will want to talk to you, they will want to meet up to you. And it's the same for games. If you pinpoint what your game is and be brutal with it, it might be that you scare off a lot of people, but those people that actually care about your game and will spend money on it and want to read articles about it, they need to have that information why your game is good and why it is important for them. Which leads us to the second problem. I call it the division problem. That is actually a thing that happened, that I pitched a cool indie game to a journalist I know, and he said, I love that game, but no way I'm going to cover it because today I have to write 4 other news about the division first, because that's what gets them a lot of clicks. So one way to work with that is, I think that's the most important learning from today, always try to think in headlines. If you pitch games, if you pitch stories, try to think if they could make a good headline you could use. Because if you make a good headline that brings clicks, that brings the journalist money. They live off that. That is their business. That's important for them. So you help them helping promote your game. Of course, that doesn't mean that all journalists just are money-grabbing evil people. Of course not. It is a bit driver for them, but there are also other ways how you get game coverage. Often it's personal reasons, personal relationships. Maybe there's a marketing spending behind it. But in general, it is a very good approach to think if your pitch makes a good headline. One game that was so good at it is No Man's Sky. I know it's very controversial, but just in terms of PR, No Man's Sky campaign was an absolute masterpiece. And it's just in the way how they talked about certain things. You would maybe pitch No Man's Sky in that way. You would say, No Man's Sky, we have a new trailer and it shows a massive universe. That's an okay pitch, but how they pitched it, they said, a No Man's Sky trailer invites you to explore the game's 18 quintillion planets. I don't know what 18 quintillion planets are. I think nobody knows. You can't even comprehend it, but it doesn't matter because it sounds very exciting, it sounds very scientific, and you want to see a video with 18 quintillion planets. So they're very much talking about the same thing here, but just in a very exciting way. Another thing they did, they were very good at painting mental images that get your imagination going. For example, a classic pitch would be, we have a new video of No Man's Sky and it shows off the procedural generation where everything is unique. Okay, I get that. Well, okay. But what they pitched was, No Man's Sky is a game in which even the developers haven't seen all of the game. And suddenly that sounds very exciting. You just start to imagine that someone goes up in the morning, plays the game, and suddenly there's a planet with a new weird AI that takes over planets, and he discovers things for the first time and posts this on the internet, and it's really cool. So again, by describing the same game with interesting language that you can use in headlines, they managed to convey a message in a really good way. What follows now are a few other examples of how you can think in headlines. Of course, there's no easy template how you can make up those headlines, but I think the easiest way is to get some inspiration, see what other people are doing, and just get in the mindset of how you can craft good headlines. A question I get asked a lot is, if you pitch a game, is it okay to say it is like Minecraft in space, or it is like GTA in the desert? Is it okay to refer to other games? I would say yes, sometimes. It really depends on your point of reference. For example, we have a game here called Northgard, and that we just recently had a very successful PR campaign with. The reason Northgard worked well is it looks very similar to a game called Banished, and it also looks similar to a game called Settlers, which was massive in Germany. But over the last couple of years, there were not a lot of games like that, meaning there's a high demand for it. In that case, suddenly referring to other game becomes very interesting for press. Because if you pitch that game and say, our new Settlers-like game, Northgard, is announced, they go like, okay, if you write that in the headline, all the Settlers fans are going to click on it. The name of my game is not even that important. They just want to serve the Settlers fan. So if you know you have a good point of reference where there's a high demand, I think there's no harm in referencing to other games, or even referencing to other art forms. We have a game here that called Memoranda, and it's a point-and-click adventure. It looks pretty, but by no means it would get the massive amount of coverage it would usually get. But the way they pitched it is that it is a game that is inspired by the Japanese author Haruki Murakami, who is very famous and who has massive following, and also a big overlap, I think, in the gaming community that like his books, but there's just no games in that direction. So again, you have a very strong lead. And what you see in the headline, which is also interesting, it's taken from Kotaku, it doesn't even mention the game title. because it's not important to the readers, because the game title is not known, but it's important that it's inspired by that author. And by the way, all those examples that I'm showing, they all got a massive amount of coverage. All those pictures and headlines, they got like all the big media on their board. There's also another way to get headlines, which is a bit more experimental. It's called guerrilla marketing. And we see an example here from Polygot. And it's a cool game. By no means I want to offend the developers, but it's not the prettiest game on earth. And they got massive coverage. And how they did it, they said the game is free for everyone that gets a certain really hard Binding of Isaac achievement. And again, why is that great for media? Because suddenly they can have a headline that first of all mentions Binding of Isaac. That will get them loads of clicks. And it mentions free stuff as well for certain players. You want to find out if you get that game for free. That is a great headline. That's why they got so much coverage and so much traction with that. If you're interested in more insights on guerrilla marketing and how that works, there's also a talk from me on the GDC Vault from last year. And I know what you could say now. You could say like, oh, there were good examples, but it's really hard to come up with headlines because everything is taken already. But it's just not true. There's always new angles. There's always new ways you can go. So just some further examples. For example, Hyper Light Drifter was promoted with being that every second in the game looks like a stunning wallpaper. That sounds more interesting than saying it's a pretty game. Oh Boy obviously had a really good hook because it was in development for over 10 years. That made for a great headline. It's very relatable with a dev focus. Or a really hard game called Devil Daggers, where there's an achievement that only one person on Earth unlocked. Again, it's not so much about the game as for a really interesting story that got them plenty of coverage in loads of countries. So now that we figured out our cool Tinder pitch that we can convey in 10 seconds, and we figured out the good headline we want to get, now we want to all put that into an email that actually press wants to read. That's a really important thing. I think the next slide is quite hands-on, and I hope you can use it. That's how we write emails at the moment. It's called the perfect email pitch. That's our AIDA template. And the way it works is, first we want to get the attention of the journalists. So write a really catchy subject line. In that case, it's not just, we don't say the game title, we say it is a mystery game dealing with homophobia and self-discovery. And suddenly, you already have a good hook there, you already have an interesting story there, and instead of just saying that game is launched today. Now that we got the interest of the journalist, the attention of the journalist, we want to get their interest. So we write a really short game text or pitch text, and that's just really straightforward 2 or 3 lines. What is the story we want to tell you today and why you should care about it? And with that, we put it directly into the email, a nice little animated GIF and the trailer underneath, or if you don't have a GIF, at least a nice screenshot that maybe links to a trailer, or at least a nice screenshot, some kind of visual element. And after that, there's a little text that we had to do for that game. Sometimes there's extra information you have to put in. If you can avoid it, skip the next paragraph, and you go to desire. Because now that we got the journalist, we got his attention, we also got his interest. Now he wants to find out more because he's up for covering that story. So here's the desire to get more information. That's exactly what we give him. What we give him here is a link to our press page with the assets. And then we say, if you want more information, here's a link to the blog post, here's a link to an online press release, or here's a link, or you can find the full press release copied below. And the last step is not always something you have to do, but if it's just a simple news story you want to get coverage on, the email is over pretty much then. But sometimes you have something you want to have from the journalist, and that would be the call to action. That could be, if you're interested in the interview, let me know. If you want a review key, just let me know. Do you want to maybe meet at GDC or a certain event? Just let me know. So that's pretty much the way we write emails now. And as you can see, it's very, very short and compressed information. It's hard to craft one of those emails, but once you have it, they tend to get quite high open and return rates. And of course, as it always is for email pitches, if you can make it personal, even better. If you know the journalist or what they're talking about, add a little sentence in the beginning and say, hi Kate, I really think you really like story-driven game, maybe you want to check that out. And then you run out that pitch. So now that we got our perfect pitch email, we also want to pitch it to the right people, because there's just no point in sending it to people that don't care about it. And I can't stress this enough, and I know it is really tempting to just get a massive email list and just spread your news out there, but it's definitely worth doing your homework, losing a lot of Google and a lot of Twitter to just find out which journalist at which outlet cares about your game and will cover it. If you've done that, if you find out the journalist that should be interested into your game, and you can't find their email address, Email Hunter is a very good website that often helps to find email addresses, and you can use it for free. It's also very good to look into freelancers. Sometimes you find them because they just write certain articles on different websites, and they are often, especially for smaller games, easier to pitch to because they work in a different way and are often more focused on feature pieces than normal websites are. Another god you can pray to, which is very helpful, is official blogs, especially if you work on consoles. The PlayStation blog and the Xbox Wire are really great outlets. They will often feature your game, but the thing is, often they don't ask you, so you have to go to them and say, we have a release date, can we announce it on your blog? And they will write you a blog post, and those things get great coverage. So definitely, if you do a console game, try to get in touch with them. A lot of the rules we just discussed today also work with streamers and YouTubers. However, there are a few things that work quite differently. First of all, they don't care so much about having a good headline. Instead, you want to convince them why that game is really fun to watch. So you have to think your headline in that direction. And again, it really helps to show an animated GIF that just shows why the game is funny and why his or her viewers will probably care about it. Also, it's like a press kit. You want to give the streamers and the YouTubers something that's easy to work with. So you want to do some things like have a little space for your window in your game where they can put your little selfie window in. You want to have a window mode and be able to switch off usernames so that it's easier for them to record and stream your games. Also, again, in the direction of guerrilla marketing, some companies are really good at creating little special features that makes it more fun to stream your game. For example, we had Darkest Dungeon, which is famous for having a really good narrator, and they made little voice pads that says, new subscriber, and things like that. Makes it more fun to watch. Or we have Cluster Truck, where the developers implemented something that if they saw a big streamer, they could just press a few buttons, and suddenly they could control something in their game, and suddenly it would say, speedrun mode, baby, and the game goes up in 50 times in speed, and the streamer doesn't know what's going on, the chat goes crazy. Really good stuff if you make the game more fun to watch. And the last rule is make something pull-worthy. Because all we talked about now is how we craft a really nice pitch and how we get it to the journalists or the influencers that we want to reach. But in the end of the day, you have to make something that's pull-worthy, because otherwise it doesn't stick. What I mean by that is there is push PR, where you push something out with marketing muscle where there's maybe not a lot of demand. And the opposite of that is pull PR, where you have something really, really great, and people just want to hear all of it, but you don't actually do something for it. You don't do a crazy PR stunt, you just wait, you tweet a bit, and they just come for it. And of course, pull PR is the ideal scenario, because it's easier from a PR point of view. But to do that, you have to make a masterpiece game, and that's not always easy. So I think the way to go and play it safe is you try to make something as pull-worthy as you can, but then you also push it. Because otherwise, again, you run the risk that people just don't find it, even if it's really great. So make something pull-worthy and push it. The two last slides from today is just a summary. First of all, we talked about the 5 key facts from the media landscape, which is English media is opinion leader. PlayStation gets more coverage than Xbox. The average launch numbers, the coverage you can get for a AAA game is around 1,500, and for a AAA indie game, 230. Mobile media is way smaller than the media of PC and console games. And if you look at VR headsets, Oculus gets more coverage than the HTC Vive. And the 5 golden rules of how you get the games covered: make a game Tinder-ready, which means the 10-second rules. Also use GIFs whenever you can. Try to get loves, not likes. Think in headlines, like a lot of headlines and good headlines. Use the AIDA pitch email template that we discussed before. Really make the effort and find out the gods you're praying to, because there's no point in trying to sell some things to people they just don't want or can't use. And the last point is try to make something pull-worthy and then push it out. Thanks a lot for listening, and I will be in the wrap-up room after if you have questions.